Sorry for the interruption there. This chapter really puts into perspective that labels can be put onto children even before we meet them. That if you are seeing a child walk down the street and maybe they don't have the nicest clothes or they're a little dirty, that we kind of automatically label them as poor or not clean. Or if you have a teacher come and tell you, oh, I've had that kid before and this is what they did, you automatically assume that this is what they're going to do. The author did an amazing job of teaching the subject of labeling and how that can even dampen some children's perspective on themselves before you meet them. It gave examples of how the teacher had started with a whole new class of kids at a whole new school that she had no knowledge of, and one conversation with one teacher had given her a perspective of these kids that she wouldn't have had if she hadn't had that conversation. If she hadn't had that conversation with that teacher, she would have maybe thought differently of these kids and wouldn't have these labels on them. I learned from this chapter that children's views on themselves can be directly related back to the labels put on them by adults in their lives. And as soon as the comments of being slow and bad will stick in their head, they react in ways from these comments, meaning that if you keep telling them that they're bad, they're just going to keep acting bad. Whereas if you give them positive reinforcement and let them know that you recognize their behavior, but this is what you think they should be doing and maybe how to do it, that would revert their way of thinking about themselves and maybe think, wow, this person has taken the time out of their day to care about me and think about me and show me ways that I can better myself. I'm going to stop. What I learned from this chapter is judging, and I'm going to stop the judging thoughts and revert back to thinking why a child might act like this. Again, I, being a mom, am always rushing and I'm always judging, and I never stop to take a minute and think about why my child might be acting like that. Maybe why she's crying for no apparent reason, or why she's having a hard time writing her G's, or maybe why that morning she is just unbelievably cranky. If I took a minute and stopped judging and saying, oh, she's just cranky today, or oh, that's just how she is because she's in a stage, I could realize that maybe that morning she was crying because the night before there was an argument, or I was rushing her too much and she really just wanted to zip up her jacket herself because that's what she had been practicing all week. And by taking that minute to think about it, it puts into perspective how the children actually feel. This book made me feel powerful. I had a whole new perspective on knowledge, and that I'm excited to share and use with the children and the adults in my life. There were times, in this book where I felt almost ashamed of how I was acting, and how realizing that, wow, I do those things that this book is talking about and they're not healthy, and I almost felt ashamed of the way that I had been brought up and the way that I was translating into my daily life. But knowing that this book gave us examples that I'm not the only one and that there are ways to improve this made me feel that much better and powerful in the knowledge that the book was giving me. The book had lost my interest at one point in the beginning where I was a little confused about the dialogue being used, but once I read more and I realized the objectivity of the book was to use real life scenarios and conversations from lunchtimes and teachers, it was easier to relate and understand. Excuse my yawning, I'm so sorry. The author's opinions about language and proper communication skills, responding and feelings and needs and punishment were all very relatable and explained in a way where the reader didn't feel bad for how they may need to be connected. As there was present examples of how most people were raised in certain situations and how that relates in how they speak to children, I found that a very powerful message and very consistent throughout the book. This book affected me in many ways. As a child, I grew up in a broken home, and I was always concerned that as an adult, some of these guilts or traits would be brought on with the children that I interact with. As a mom and someone who's interested in childhood studies, I find that myself very interested in how I speak to children, and I'm very cautious on how I can change that. I'm also very aware, I try to be, on what I'm saying. If the things I picked up from childhood are now translating in how I speak to my own child or the children I work with, then I need to take a minute to stop and think about what's a better way to approach that. This book reinforced that it's normal to feel this way, and it's normal to stop and take a minute and think about that. And it's shifted a whole new way of thinking that just honestly makes so much more sense to me, why we speak to children the way we do and how we can change that. I relate to this book on my own personal agenda because I am motivated to learn and apply new ways of speaking to children. This book has a very strong message, but it's also a very positive way of putting it. The huge strength of this book is the positive message that it gives, and it keeps the reader interested and engaged. And one weakness of this book is when the chapter is broken down into questions and personal stories. Throughout some of them, I felt that they were informative, but some of them I felt them to be a bit lengthy and I got lost. I believe that the authors achieved their purpose of making people aware of their language and how it translates into children, and I completely agree with the argument, and I believe that she did an amazing job of putting perspective, and that makes people stop and think how effective their method may be and how effective it may not be, and how they could change it even if they think that their method is perfect. That this book gives them a minute to stop and think about maybe it's not. After the first chapter, the author keeps you engaged and reading, and it's enjoyable by adding comments and personal stories and comics. And I'm not that much of a bookworm, but I applaud this author for her insight and her language and how easy she made this book to read. Thank you so much. That is my book report on How to Talk So Children Can Learn at School and at Home by Adele Faber and Elaine Mazalish. Thank you so much.